The drill hit water at 63 feet on a Tuesday morning in April, which was not supposed to happen. Castle Land Development's geotechnical team had been working the northeast corner of the Millvale Ridge site for 11 days. The boring plan called for dry shale to a depth of 90 feet, followed by the sandstone formation that had been identified in the site investigation report as the stable bearing layer for the development's eastern foundation. The drill was supposed to reach that sandstone. Instead, at 63 feet, it encountered a pressurized water column that rose 14 inches up the bore before anyone understood what was happening. Warren Castle was on site when it happened, which was unusual. He was not a site visit CEO. He was a boardroom CEO, and the fact that he had driven out to Millvale Ridge at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning meant that the $340 million mixed-use development that was supposed to break ground in 6 weeks was occupying a specific category of his attention. He watched the drill crew shut down the column. He watched his project manager make 3 phone calls. He watched from across the cleared acreage a person in a reflective vest and work clothes who was picking up debris along the site perimeter pause in what he was doing and look at the drill rig for a long moment before going back to work. That person was Roy Hatcher. He was 46 years old, a single father, and his name badge said Site Maintenance. He had been on this site for 7 months. He had also, between 2008 and 2020, been the head hydrogeologist for Castle Land Development. The person who had mapped every aquifer, every recharge zone, every subsurface water feature on every parcel Castle had ever developed in southwestern Ohio, including this one. His field notebook was in his truck. It was a standard geological field notebook, spiral-bound, plastic-covered, pages yellowed at the edges from 11 years of outdoor use. On page 47, in his own handwriting, from a site visit he had made in October of 2014, was the notation, NE quadrant, pressurized fractured shale, estimated 60 to 70 feet, not suitable for foundation bearing, recommend site investigation revision before any eastern development. The notation had been in the file. The file had been in the archive. The archive had been restructured in 2021 when Warren had brought in a new project management system, and Roy's original site investigation documents had been migrated, incorrectly, into a legacy folder that the new system did not surface in standard searches. Roy had known about the water at 63 feet for 10 years. Stay with this, because the man picking up debris along the site perimeter was the only person within 40 miles who could tell Warren Castle exactly what his drill had just found. And the field notebook that explained it was sitting in a truck with a site maintenance magnetic sign on the door. Roy Hatcher lived in a house on Kirby Avenue in Cincinnati's Norwood neighborhood, a 2-bedroom frame house that he had bought in 2016 when his marriage was still intact, and that he had stayed in after it wasn't, because his son's school was 3 blocks away, and the mortgage was manageable on a hydrogeologist's salary and had remained manageable, with some adjustments, on a site maintenance worker's income. The house was the kind of house that accumulates the specific evidence of a man who knows how to fix things. The porch railing he had replaced himself in the fall, the repointed brickwork along the foundation that he had done over 2 weekends in October, the kitchen window that had been difficult to close, and now was not. His son's name was Luca. He was 10 years old, had Roy's dark blonde hair cut close on the sides and longer on top, brown eyes, and a gap between his top 2 front teeth that appeared when he smiled at something he found genuinely funny rather than something he was expected to find funny. He had a quality that Roy had noticed early and had never been able to fully explain. He was interested in things that were underground. He kept a journal of things under streets, a notebook in which he recorded from various sources what was beneath various surfaces, pipe types, utilities, subway lines in cities he had never visited, geological formations under neighborhoods he lived in. Roy had told him about aquifers when Luca was 7. He had not expected the conversation to last an hour and a half. Luca had asked questions with the focused persistence of a child who has encountered something that reorganizes his sense of what the world contains. He had drawn, that evening, a cross-section of what he imagined the ground below Norwood looked like, and had brought it to Roy for correction. Roy had corrected it, gently, specifically, with accurate geological data, and Luca had redrawn it 4 times until it was right. The field notebook was in the truck during the week and in the house on weekends, not hidden on the shelf in the spare room, Between the Geological Survey references and the Ohio EPA water quality reports that Roy kept, because they were useful and because some habits of a professional life survive the professional life. The notebook was from 2014 and had 63 pages of field notes in Roy's precise handwriting, site coordinates, formation descriptions, depth estimates, water table readings, the specific observations of 12 years of walking land that other people would eventually build on. Roy had gotten his master's in hydrogeology from Ohio State in 2005. He had joined Castle Land Development in 2008 when the company was smaller and more focused, and Warren Castle still came to site meetings and listened to what the technical staff said. He had spent 12 years mapping the aquifer systems under every parcel Castle had purchased or developed in a 3-county radius. Roy's job was to identify those risks before anyone built anything. He had identified them, consistently. 12 years of field notebooks, laboratory analyses, subsurface reports, and recommendations that had, as far as he knew, never produced a single foundation failure on a Castle project. The departure in 2020 had come in the second wave of restructuring that Warren had initiated after the pandemic slowdown. The second wave had restructured the technical division. Environmental, geotechnical, and hydrogeological functions were to be contracted out as needed, project by project, rather than maintained as in-house expertise. Roy had been offered a contractor relationship at a rate that was 40% of his salary per project, with no guarantee of project frequency. He had calculated what this meant for the mortgage and Luca's schedule, and had declined. He had taken the site maintenance position 8 months later, when it was posted, because it was a Castle site, the Millvale Ridge site, specifically, and because the Millvale Ridge site was a parcel he had surveyed himself. He had not said this to anyone. He had wanted to see the plan before he said anything. He had been seeing the plan, one document at a time, for 7 months. The development plan for Millvale Ridge had been prepared by a geotechnical consulting firm called Meridian Geotech, contracted by Castle in 2022, 2 years after Roy's departure. He had read it in February, on a Saturday morning at his kitchen table, with his 2014 field notebook open beside it. The plan was competent. The problem was the data. The subsurface investigation had been based on 2 sources: a 2019 geotechnical boring program that had been conducted in the western portion of the site and the Ohio EPA's statewide aquifer database. Neither source reflected the specific conditions in the northeast quadrant of the site. The northeast quadrant had been surveyed by Roy in 2014 in a supplemental field investigation he had conducted after observing surface indicators of subsurface water movement during a site visit, indicators that the standard investigation protocol would not have flagged because they required the kind of knowledge that came from 12 years of looking at this specific landscape. He had called his former colleague, a hydrogeologist named Diane Cho, who still worked in the field, in April. "The report exists," he told her. "It's in the archive. It's accessible. It just wasn't accessed. And the site plan is proceeding on data that doesn't include it." "You have a professional license," she said. "I have a license," he said. "I'm not licensed on this project. I'm not affiliated with this project in a professional capacity." "Roy," she said, "you mapped that aquifer." "Yes," he said, "and now they're drilling into it." He looked out the kitchen window at the backyard where Luca was kicking a soccer ball against the fence. "I'm going to be on site when they drill," he said. He was on site when they drilled. He was picking up debris along the perimeter when the column rose 14 inches above the bore. He watched Warren Castle watch the crew shut it down. He went back to picking up debris that afternoon. He took the field notebook out of his truck and put it on the passenger seat where he could see it. He drove home. He sat at the kitchen table, after Luca was asleep, and looked at page 47. NE quadrant, pressurized fractured shale, estimated 60 to 70 feet, not suitable for foundation bearing. He called Diane. "It was 63 feet, he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Roy," she said. "I know," he said. He submitted the report the following morning, not to Warren, not to the project manager, to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Water Resources, which had statutory authority over groundwater protection and subsurface development impacts in the state, and to the Hamilton County Environmental Services Office. He submitted it as a private citizen with professional expertise, attaching his hydrogeological license number, the 2014 field notebook documentation, photographed, paginated, time-stamped, and a 2-page technical summary, explaining the discrepancy between his 2014 findings and the current site investigation data. He did not contact Warren Castle. He filed with the regulatory bodies that had authority over the issue, which was what his license obligated him to do. He drove to the site and swept the perimeter. The response from the Division of Water Resources came in 9 days, faster than Roy had expected, which told him something about how they had read the submission. The response was a formal notice of review. The notice required Castle Land Development to provide documentation of its subsurface investigation methodology and to pause boring activities in the northeast quadrant pending review. Warren Castle received the notice on a Wednesday afternoon. Roy was on the other side of the site when it arrived. He was not on the other side of the site because he was avoiding the moment of its arrival. He was on the other side of the site because that was where the perimeter debris was that morning. He had submitted the report. The regulatory process was now doing what regulatory processes did. He had gone to work. What happened in the 3 days after the notice arrived was the specific organized panic of a $340 million project that has hit a regulatory wall 6 weeks before groundbreaking. Lawyers were retained. The project manager made a sequence of calls, and Warren Castle drove to the site twice in the same day, once in the morning, once in the late afternoon, and stood at the edge of the northeast quadrant, looking at the bore location for long periods that suggested he was processing something. On Friday afternoon, Roy's supervisor told Roy that Warren Castle had requested a meeting with the full site staff on Monday morning. Roy said he would be there. He was there. The meeting was in the construction trailer. Present were the project manager, the site engineer, 2 members of the drilling crew, Roy, and 2 other maintenance workers. Warren Castle came in at 8:15 and stood at the end of the trailer and said, in the direct manner of a man who had decided that directness was the most efficient available option, someone filed a regulatory submission about the northeast quadrant water condition. I need to know if anyone on this crew has information about subsurface conditions on this site that hasn't been communicated through the project team. He looked around the trailer. Roy looked at his field notebook, which he had brought with him. He said, I do. Warren Castle looked at him. Roy was sitting at the end of the trailer bench, in his site maintenance vest and work boots, with the field notebook on his knee. Warren had seen him on the site. He had not, in 7 months of Roy being on the site, looked at him the way he was looking at him now. Who are you? Warren said. Roy Hatcher, he said. Site maintenance. You filed the submission. Yes, Roy said. Warren looked at the notebook on Roy's knee. Is that my 2014 field survey of this site? Roy said. Northeast quadrant, specifically. Fractured shale, pressurized water column, 60 to 70 feet. It's on page 47. Warren said nothing for a moment. You surveyed this site, he said. In 2014, Roy said. I was your head hydrogeologist at the time. I surveyed every site Castle acquired between 2008 and 2020. Another silence. The project manager, who had been present at some of those surveys, was looking at Roy with an expression that suggested he was assembling information that had not previously been assembled. Hatcher, the project manager said. Roy Hatcher. You left in 2020, the project manager said. The hydrogeology function was contracted out, Roy said. I declined the contractor offer. And you took a site maintenance position, Warren said. On this site, Roy said. Yes. Warren looked at him for a long moment. Why? He said. Roy thought about how to answer this. He had been answering questions like this in his head for 7 months. Because the question was obvious, and he had known someone would eventually ask it. Because I surveyed this site, he said, and I had concerns about whether my 2014 findings had been incorporated into the current development plan. I wanted to be present on the site so I could assess the situation. I couldn't do that as a contractor. Contractors access what they're contracted to access. I could do it as maintenance. Warren said. You've been here for 7 months. Yes, Roy said. Doing what? Maintenance, Roy said. And reading the site documentation, and waiting to see if the boring plan included the northeast quadrant. Warren looked at the notebook again. Page 47, he said. Roy opened the notebook and held it out. Warren took it. He read page 47. He was not a hydrogeologist. He could read technical notation with the competence of someone who had been in land development for 30 years and had learned enough to understand what he was reading. He read it. He turned the page and read page 48. He turned back to 47. He set the notebook on the table. He looked at the project manager. "Pull the archive," he said. "Everything from before 2022. I want every document Roy Hatcher produced on this site." "It's in the legacy folder," the project manager said. "I know it's in the legacy folder," Warren said. "Pull it." The archive pull took 2 days. Roy Hatcher's 12 years at Castle Land Development had produced, by the project manager's count, 47 site investigation reports, 23 supplemental field surveys, 11 aquifer recharge zone assessments, and 6 formal recommendations that had resulted in modifications to development plans. Those 6 modifications had, in the project manager's subsequent assessment, prevented what he estimated as 3 to 4 significant foundation or drainage issues that would have emerged during or after construction. He presented this to Warren on a Thursday morning, in the same construction trailer, with Roy present, because Warren had asked Roy to be present. 47 reports, Warren said. Between 2008 and 2020, the project manager said. Every major acquisition in the 3-county area. Warren looked at Roy. "You produced all of these," he said. "Most of them," Roy said. "The ones before 2015 were mine alone. After 2015, I had a team of 2. The supplemental surveys were mine throughout." "The 6 modifications," Warren said. "These were cases where development plans were changed based on your findings." "Yes," Roy said. "In one case, the modification was declined, and the development proceeded as planned. That's the Beachmont Avenue project. I believe you had drainage issues in the first winter." Warren was quiet. "We did," he said. "Consistent with what I had predicted," Roy said. He said it without emphasis. It was simply accurate, and accurate was the only register he operated in. "Did you know this when you took the maintenance position?" Warren said. Roy looked at him directly. "I suspected it," he said. "I didn't know for certain until I accessed the archive in March and confirmed that the legacy migration had separated my pre-2020 work from the active project documentation." "You confirmed it in March," Warren said. "Yes, and you submitted the regulatory notice in April, after the bore confirmed the water at 63 feet, Roy said. "I had a professional obligation to act once the field evidence matched the documented finding. I submitted at the first opportunity after the obligation was clear." Warren looked at the document summary. 47 reports, he said again. 12 years. "Yes," Roy said. The person who had known was not Warren. Warren had made the decision to contract out the hydrogeological function in 2020 without full understanding of what he was contracting out. He had understood it as a cost-efficiency decision. This was a management failure, but it was not a knowing suppression of relevant information. The person who had known was the project manager. His name was Dennis Farr, and he had been with Castle Land Development for 14 years, 6 of them overlapping with Roy's tenure. He had attended site visits with Roy. He had received Roy's reports. He had, in the 2022 transition to the new project management system, overseen the data migration that had placed Roy's pre-2020 reports in the legacy folder. The Division of Water Resources review team arrived at the Millvale Ridge site on a Monday, 2 weeks after Roy's submission. Their lead reviewer had asked, as part of the review process, for the complete project file, including all historical investigations. The project manager had provided the file. He had provided everything in the current system. He had not, initially, provided the legacy folder contents. The reviewer had asked specifically, "Do you have any pre-2022 site investigation documentation for this parcel?" Dennis had said, "I believe there may be some legacy materials. I'll need to check the archive." He had checked the archive. He had retrieved the documents. He had provided them, 4 days after being asked. Not the same day. Roy had learned about the delay from Diane, who had a contact in the Division of Water Resources office. He had sat with this for a while. Dennis Farr had been the person who processed the 2022 system migration. He had known, when the Meridian Geotech contract was awarded, that the pre-2020 site investigation data existed and was in the legacy archive. He had not flagged this to Meridian during the contracting process. He had not flagged it to Warren when the development plan was finalized. And when the regulatory review had asked for historical documentation, he had taken 4 days to provide material he had direct knowledge of. This was not evidence of deliberate concealment. Dennis Farr had not deleted Roy's reports. He had not falsified anything. He had made a series of decisions during the migration, during the meridian contracting, during the regulatory review, that each, individually, could be explained as oversight or procedural inattention. Together, they formed a pattern that had kept Roy's 2014 findings outside the development process for 3 years, had allowed a $340 million project to proceed on incomplete subsurface data, and had delayed the provision of critical historical documents to a regulatory review. The Division of Water Resources review team asked specifically, "Do you have any pre-2022 site investigation documentation for this parcel?" Dennis had said, "I believe there may be some legacy materials. I'll need to check the archive." He had checked the archive. He had retrieved the document. He had provided them 4 days after being asked, not the same day. Roy had learned about the delay from Diane. He had sat with this for a while. Dennis Farr had been the person who processed the 2022 system migration. He had known, when the Meridian Geotech contract was awarded, that the pre-2020 site investigation data existed and was in the legacy archive. He had not flagged this to Meridian during the contracting process. Roy presented this to Warren not as an accusation but as a sequence of facts. He presented it in Warren's office, with Dennis present, because Roy believed that the facts should be in the same room as the people they concerned. He laid it out in order: the migration decision, the Meridian contracting, the regulatory response delay. He presented each item with a date, a documented reference, and a factual description of what had happened. He did not editorialize. He did not use the word concealment. He said, "I want to be clear about what I know and what I don't know. I know these events occurred in this sequence. I don't know the intent behind them. The sequence is what it is." Warren listened. Dennis was quiet throughout. When Roy finished, Warren said, "Dennis, is the sequence as Roy has described it?" Dennis said, "The migration placement was a procedural decision. The Meridian contracting, I didn't think to flag the legacy materials as relevant to the new engagement." "Did you know they were there?" Warren said. A pause. "Yes," Dennis said. "I knew the legacy folder contained pre-2020 site investigation work. I made a judgment call that the new investigation would supersede it, without verifying what the legacy materials contained," Warren said. "Without pulling them, no," Dennis said. "And the 4-day delay in the regulatory response," Warren said. "I was verifying the completeness of the materials before submitting them," Dennis said. Warren looked at Roy. Roy said nothing. "The Beachmont Avenue drainage issues," Warren said. "The one modification I declined." "Dennis, were you the project manager on that?" A longer pause. "Yes," Dennis said. Warren looked at the table. "I'd like you to wait outside," he said to Dennis. What Warren needed, before he could determine what to do about Dennis Farr, was to understand the full scope of what Roy's 12 years of work represented for the company's current project portfolio. He asked Roy to come to the Castle offices on 4th Street for a meeting with the company's legal counsel and its current project leads. Roy came. He brought the field notebook and his copy of the complete archive of reports he had produced between 2008 and 2020, which he had kept on a hard drive at home because the reports were his professional work, and he had kept his professional work. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Roy walked the legal team and the project leads through the 47 reports, site by site. He identified 5 active Castle developments, projects currently in construction or recently completed, where his pre-2020 findings had potentially significant implications for the current work. In 2 cases, he could not confirm incorporation without a detailed plan comparison. The legal team asked Roy to perform the comparison. Roy said he would need access to the current development documentation and 2 weeks of time outside his site maintenance schedule. Warren said that could be arranged. Roy performed the comparison. One of the 2 uncertain cases was confirmed clean. The other was not clean. There was a drainage routing decision in a completed mixed-use development in Hyde Park that was inconsistent with his 2013 Aquifer recharge zone assessment for that parcel. It was the kind of problem that was addressable in advance and expensive to address after the fact. Roy wrote a technical memo documenting the finding. He submitted it to Warren and the legal team at 9:30 on a Thursday morning. He then drove to the Millvale Ridge site and swept the perimeter. Warren called him at noon. "The Hyde Park finding," Warren said. "Yes," Roy said. "You were on the maintenance crew when you wrote this." "I wrote it last night," Roy said. "At home, on my own time." "Roy," Warren said, "I want to have a conversation about what your role here looks like going forward. Not on the phone, in person. Are you available this week?" Roy looked at the site perimeter around him. "I'm available," he said. The conversation happened on Friday afternoon. In Warren's office on 4th Street, Warren said, "The regulatory review, where does it stand?" Roy walked through it. "Can you perform that investigation?" Warren said. "I can," Roy said. "I'm the most qualified person to do it, given that I have 12 years of baseline data on this site. But I would need to be retained in a formal professional capacity. The investigation would need to carry my license and my seal, a formal consulting engagement," he said. "For the Northeast Quadrant investigation specifically, and for the Hyde Park drainage review, and for any future castle project that involves sites I surveyed between 2008 and 2020. I have baseline data on 43 active and prospective castle sites that doesn't exist anywhere else. That data is mine. It's in my field notebooks and my hard drive and my professional memory. It has value to you, and I'm willing to provide it under appropriate terms," Warren said. "The site maintenance position. What do you want to do about it?" Roy thought about Luca and the school 3 blocks from the house and the mortgage. "The consulting work will take time to ramp up," he said. "If it's acceptable, I'd like to maintain a reduced site maintenance role during the transition period, for continuity." "It's the same site," Roy said. "I know it well, and I have a son in school 3 blocks from my house. The maintenance schedule works for that." Warren said, "We'll figure out the schedule." The confrontation with Dennis Farr happened in Warren's presence, in Warren's office. Warren said, "Dennis, I want to be direct. The migration decision was a systems failure. The Meridian contracting decision, not flagging the legacy materials, I consider that a professional failure. You had knowledge that was relevant to the contracting decision, and you didn't surface it. I don't know whether you assessed the legacy materials as irrelevant or whether you didn't want to surface them. I'm telling you I don't have confidence. I know the answer to that," Dennis said. "I believed the Meridian investigation would be comprehensive enough to supersede the prior work, without reviewing the prior work," Warren said. "Without pulling it." "No." Warren looked at the memo. "The Beachmont Avenue decision. You were the project manager. Roy's finding was correct. We had drainage issues consistent with what he predicted. So you were aware, before the Millvale Ridge migration decision in 2022, that Roy's findings had predictive accuracy on drainage and subsurface conditions." Dennis was quiet. "Yes," he said. "And you chose not to surface the legacy materials to Meridian." "I made a judgment call," Dennis said. "Yes," Warren said. "You did, Roy," Warren said. Roy looked at him. "I want you to know that what you did, staying on this site, filing the regulatory submission, presenting the archive findings, I don't underestimate what it took to do those things in the position you were in," Roy said. "I had a professional obligation." "Yes," Warren said. "And a personal calculation, with a son in school 3 blocks from your house. I'm aware that those 2 things exist at the same time." Roy said nothing. "The consulting engagement," Warren said. "Let's get that formalized this week." The consulting engagement was formalized in a document that Roy's attorney reviewed and approved. The Northeast Quadrant investigation took 6 weeks. Roy conducted it with the same methodology he had used in 2014: field mapping, soil sampling, water table monitoring, pressure testing in the fractured shale formation. He produced a 38-page report that integrated the 2014 findings with the current field data and provided a revised foundation specification for the Millvale Ridge Eastern development. The Division of Water Resources reviewed the report and issued a conditional approval for boring to resume. Warren's project team incorporated it. Boring resumed in August. Roy was on site when boring resumed, not as a maintenance worker. He was no longer carrying the site maintenance assignment, which had ended when the consulting engagement became his primary relationship with Castle. He was on site as a consulting hydrogeologist, in a different vest, with his name on the site documentation as the hydrogeological engineer of record for the Northeast Quadrant investigation. He had told Luca about it the previous Sunday, while they were replacing the weather stripping on the back door. Not all of it. The full version was a conversation for a Saturday afternoon, when Luca was older and could hold more of the context. But the relevant part, "You know the site I've been working on," Roy said. "The big one?" Luca said. "The one you surveyed when I was little?" "Yes," Roy said. "I'm going to be the hydrogeologist on that project now, not the maintenance crew." Luca looked at the weather stripping he was holding. "Because of the water," he said. Roy had mentioned, in general terms, that there had been a water finding at the site. He had not known Luca had been tracking it. "Because of the water," Roy said.